Sherman tank ammunition fires seen from German lines. Oberst Viktor Rauthmann stared through his field glasses at burning American tanks outside Metz. October 1944. M4 Shermans burning like torches across the battlefield, crews desperately escaping hatches as secondary explosions ripped through hulls. "We call 'em Tommy cookers," his intelligence officer remarked with grim satisfaction. 8 out of 10 Shermans hit by our Panthers burst into flames. Rauthmann nodded, unaware that Allied engineers had already solved this deadly vulnerability. A technical modification, American tankers called wet stowage, would soon render this German advantage nearly obsolete. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Across the battlefield near Arracourt, Lieutenant Karl Weber of the 11th Panzer Division counted burning Sherman hulls through his Zeiss rangefinder. The Americans were advancing in waves, and German gunners picked their targets methodically. Each hit produced the same result: catastrophic fires that consumed machines and men. Wehrmacht tank commanders had learned to exploit this vulnerability, focusing fire on ammunition storage areas. Intelligence reports estimated 80% of penetrated Shermans erupted in flames. This statistic shaped German tactical doctrine throughout 1943 and much of 1944. The vulnerability stemmed from a fatal flaw in early Sherman design. Ammunition stored in sponson racks along hull sides provided easy access for loaders, but created perfect conditions for disaster when penetrated. American crews called these storage areas ready racks, but German gunners called them death racks. High-explosive rounds, stacked vertically, became incendiary bombs when hit. A single penetration could ignite dozens of propellant cases, creating unstoppable infernos. By autumn 1944, German commanders based entire defensive strategies on this American weakness. Tactical manuals emphasized aiming for hull sides rather than frontal armor. Panzer crews reported confidence facing numerically superior Sherman formations, knowing each successful hit likely meant not just a disabled tank, but a completely destroyed one with maximum crew casualties. This psychological edge sustained German armor morale despite deteriorating strategic circumstances. What Rauthmann and other Wehrmacht commanders failed to notice was a gradual, then dramatic drop in Sherman combustion rates. Beginning in spring 1944, American factories implemented wet stowage systems, surrounding ammunition with water glycol mixtures in sealed containers. This simple modification dramatically reduced fire probability after penetration from 80% to below 15%. The change happened not suddenly, but incrementally as new production Shermans reached the front, while older models remained in service. The oversight represented more than statistical misunderstanding. It revealed fundamental flaws in German intelligence gathering and analysis. Combat reports continued emphasizing spectacular Sherman fires, creating confirmation bias that masked the emerging reality. German observers noticed what they expected to see: burning tanks, while failing to document the increasing number of penetrated Shermans that survived without fires. Technical adaptations often determine battlefield outcomes more than tactical brilliance. While German engineers focused on developing increasingly powerful tank guns and thicker armor, American engineers solved practical problems that saved crew lives.
The wet stowage solution emerged from Detroit's automotive industrial base, manufacturing engineers accustomed to solving practical problems rather than theoretical ones. In September 1944, Oberstleutnant Werner Schmitz at Heereswaffenamt, Army Weapons Office, received scattered reports suggesting reduced Sherman vulnerability. The reports described penetrated American tanks remaining operational, or at least repairable, contradicting established expectations. Schmitz flagged these observations for further analysis, but chronic fuel shortages prevented thorough battlefield examination. German reconnaissance units lacked resources to document disabled versus destroyed Shermans systematically. Meanwhile, American armor losses continued, but with fundamentally different outcomes. Major General Maurice Rose's 2nd Armored Division reported 78% crew survival rates from penetrated Shermans by October 1944, compared to 21% in Normandy operations just months earlier. The statistics represented not just equipment improvement, but experienced human capital preservation. Veteran tank crews survived to fight again rather than perishing in flames. The technical solution itself reflected American industrial pragmatism. Engineers at the Detroit Arsenal tested multiple approaches before settling on the wet stowage system. Experimental versions included armored ammunition boxes, external storage compartments, and various flame-retardant materials. The winning design surrounded ammunition with water glycol mixture in sealed containers, absorbing heat and preventing flash ignition when penetrated. Production implementation proved remarkably swift. By April 1944, Fisher Body Division of General Motors retooled assembly lines to incorporate wet stowage in all new production M4A3 Shermans. The modification added minimal weight and complexity while dramatically improving survivability. Existing tanks received field modifications when possible, though many older models remained vulnerable throughout the war. Wehrmacht intelligence suffered from structural problems that prevented recognition of this change. Field reports emphasized spectacular failures while neglecting ordinary successes. Officers documented burning tanks because they drew attention. Penetrated Shermans that didn't burn received minimal notice. This reporting bias created a distorted picture that reinforced preconceptions rather than revealing emerging patterns. Communication challenges compounded the problem. German divisional intelligence sections operated with increasing isolation as Allied bombing degraded communication networks. Observations remained localized rather than aggregated for analysis. Individual panzer commanders might notice reduced Sherman fires in their sectors, but lacked mechanisms to share these insights more broadly. The fragmentation created intelligence blind spots precisely when adaptation required clear vision. By November 1944, Rauthmann's 21st Panzer Division engaged Sherman formations near Metz, expecting the familiar pattern of catastrophic fires. Instead, they encountered tanks that absorbed multiple hits without burning. Gunners reported direct penetrations that disabled vehicles but failed to produce secondary explosions. The experience contradicted everything German commanders understood about Sherman vulnerability. Rauthmann's operations officer, Major Heinrich Vollmer, drafted an urgent report to Army Group G headquarters, noting the apparent American improvement. Enemy tanks appear increasingly resistant to immolation despite successful penetration. Crews survive to fight another day rather than perishing with their machines.
The report joined dozens of others in overwhelmed intelligence sections, receiving cursory analysis amid the chaos of retreating armies. German failure to recognize this critical change stemmed partly from confirmation bias. Field commanders continued seeing what they expected, burning tanks, while discounting contradictory evidence. When 10 Shermans were hit and only one burned spectacularly, observers remembered the fire while dismissing the 9 that didn't burn as anomalies or near misses. The psychological tendency to confirm existing beliefs prevented recognition of fundamental change. For American tank crews, the improvement transformed combat experience. Lieutenant Michael Harrison of the 3rd Armored Division survived 3 tank penetrations between September 1944 and March 1945. The first time we took a direct hit from an 88, I expected to die in flames, like we'd seen happen to Baker Company, he later recounted. Instead, there was a massive jolt, smoke, but no fire. We abandoned the tank but walked away whole. That happened twice more before war's end. The new ammo stowage saved my crew repeatedly. Production statistics revealed the scope of the transformation. By September 1944, 95% of Shermans reaching European battlefields featured wet stowage systems. The modification added minimal production complexity or cost, approximately $800 per tank in 1944 currency, representing less than 1.5% of total unit cost. This small investment yielded enormous returns in crew survival and vehicle recovery rates. German technical intelligence, once the envy of military establishments worldwide, failed to identify this crucial development. The agency responsible, framed a Heerost, Foreign Armies East, focused primarily on Soviet equipment while giving secondary priority to Western Allied materiel. Their technical bulletins continued describing Shermans as combustible throughout late 1944 based on outdated information from Normandy operations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Meanwhile, American industrial capacity delivered wet stowage Shermans in overwhelming numbers. Detroit Arsenal production reached 800 improved M4A3s monthly by autumn 1944. Each replacement tank arriving at the front represented not just additional firepower, but dramatically improved crew protection. The industrial advantage manifests not just in quantity, but in critical quality improvements. Technical adaptation requires both recognition of problems and institutional capacity to implement solutions. American armor forces possessed both advantages. Combat reports from North Africa and Italy highlighted Sherman vulnerability with unsparing clarity. Army ground forces established systematic data collection about tank losses, creating statistical foundations for improvement rather than anecdotal ones. The results drove continuous adaptation throughout production runs. Organizational differences proved decisive. Wehrmacht technical development emphasized theoretical improvements over practical ones. German engineers pursued the perfect tank, while American engineers improved the available tank. This difference reflected deeper philosophical divergence. German military culture emphasized technical excellence, while American approaches prioritized practical effectiveness. The psychological impact on crews cannot be overstated. Sherman tankers in early 1944 operated with the knowledge that penetration likely meant death by fire. By late 1944, crews understood their survival chances had improved dramatically. This knowledge transformed behavior, reducing bailout rates and increasing offensive aggression. Tanks fought longer and harder when crews believed they could survive hits. Near Bastogne, in December 1944, Kampfgruppe Paper engaged elements of the 7th Armored Division during the Battle of the Bulge. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Paper expected to replicate earlier successes against American armor. His tactical plan depended on rapid destruction of Sherman formations through exploitation of their combustibility. Instead, his forces encountered tanks that absorbed punishment without the expected catastrophic failures. After 3 days of intense fighting, Piper's adjutant noted the changed circumstance in his battle diary. American tanks no longer burn as before. Our gunners report direct hits that fail to produce secondary explosions. The enemy abandons disabled vehicles but recovers them later under cover of darkness. Our attrition strategy has lost effectiveness. This observation came too late to influence broader German tactical adjustments. The intelligence failure rippled through command structures. Army Group B continued allocating anti-tank resources based on outdated vulnerability assessments. Tactical instructions still emphasize side shots to ignite ammunition, a strategy losing effectiveness with each passing week. Field commanders found themselves fighting a different enemy than the one described in intelligence summaries. American General George Patton recognized the importance of the technical improvement. In a January 1945 memo to Omar Bradley, he wrote, "Our tank losses have fundamentally changed character. Where we once lost men and machines together, we now primarily lose machines while preserving crews. This transformation allows us to maintain experienced personnel even while replacing equipment. The enemy has failed to recognize this shift to their considerable disadvantage. The metrics told the story clearly. In June 1944, 65 to 80% of penetrated Shermans resulted in catastrophic fires with total vehicle loss. By January 1945, this figure had dropped to 10 to 15% across all theaters. Crew survival rates increased from 15% to over 80% for penetrated tanks. Vehicle recovery and repair weight similarly improved, with 55% of damaged Shermans returning to service within 1 month, compared to 15% earlier in the campaign. German intelligence failure stemmed partly from traditional structural problems. The Wehrmacht lacked dedicated technical intelligence units at frontline formations. Responsibility for equipment analysis fell to already overwhelmed general staff officers. The system worked adequately when changes happened slowly, but failed against rapid American adaptation. By the time analysis identified patterns, the battlefield reality had already transformed again. For Rauthmann and other German commanders, the oversight created false confidence. Defensive plans continued assuming Sherman vulnerability long after the assumption lost validity. Resources allocated to exploit a weakness that no longer existed represented wasted effort in a war where Germany could not afford no inefficiency. The failure to recognize American adaptation accelerated German defeat by undermining tactical effectiveness. Underlying this specific intelligence failure lay deeper cultural differences. American industrial culture embraced continuous improvement and practical problem-solving. Engineers maintained constant communication with frontline units, creating feedback loops that identified problems and implemented solutions rapidly. The system valued pragmatic fixes over theoretical perfection.
The German approach emphasized comprehensive solutions rather than incremental improvements. Their Panther and Tiger tanks represented holistic designs addressing multiple vulnerabilities simultaneously. This approach produced technically superior machines, but with production limitations and long development cycles. When American adaptation invalidated key assumptions, German responses came too slowly to matter. By February 1945, the reality became impossible to ignore. A captured technical bulletin from Panzer Division Müncheberg acknowledged, "Enemy Sherman tanks demonstrate substantially reduced vulnerability to ammunition fires after penetration. Gunners should no longer expect secondary explosions and should maintain fire until target is demonstrably immobilized." The recognition came too late to influence combat outcomes in a war already strategically decided. Behind the tactical failures lay deeper intelligence breakdowns. Colonel Hans Dietrich of Oberst Section 4 examined damaged Sherman hulls in Aachen in January 1945. His investigation revealed fundamental changes in ammunition storage. "The Americans have completely redesigned internal layout," he noted. "Propellant charges now rest in water-jacketed containers below the turret floor. Direct penetration no longer creates the flash ignition conditions we previously exploited." His findings, encoded and transmitted to Berlin, arrived at a headquarters consumed by strategic crises. The tactical insight received acknowledgement but no distribution to field commanders. Wehrmacht technical intelligence suffered from compartmentalization. Armor experts in separate departments failed to collaborate effectively. The Heereswaffenamt maintained extensive documentation on Allied tank specifications, but lacked mechanisms to update field units with current information. Situation reports continued describing Sherman weaknesses that no longer existed, creating false confidence among German commanders planning defensive operations. The American approach demonstrated stark contrast. Technical observation teams attached to combat formations documented battle damage in standardized formats. Reports flowed directly to both production facilities and training centers. Engineers from Chrysler and General Motors regularly visited forward maintenance depots, examining recovered vehicles and interviewing crews. The feedback loop operated with remarkable efficiency despite the chaos of combat operations. Oberst Ludwig Kohler commanded Panzer Regiment 36 near Trier in February 1945. His battle group engaged Sherman formations from the 4th Armored Division in 3 days of intense fighting. After-action reports reflected confusion about changed circumstances.
Enemy tanks received multiple penetrating hits without expected secondary explosions. Confirmed kills required 2 to 3 times normal ammunition expenditure. Previous effectiveness estimates require revision. His observations joined dozens of similar reports in overwhelmed analysis centers. The intelligence failure extended beyond technical oversight. Wehrmacht psychological analysis misunderstood the impact of reduced vulnerability on American tactics. Sherman crews now pressed attacks with increased aggression, knowing survival chances had improved dramatically. German defenders prepared for cautious enemies, but encountered determined ones. The miscalculation compounded tactical disadvantages along the entire Western Front. At Army Group B headquarters, intelligence summaries continued describing Sherman vulnerabilities in outdated terms.
The resource constraints created intelligence blind spots precisely when accurate assessment became most critical. Organizational culture differences magnified the impact. American forces embraced lessons learned processes that valued critical self-assessment. Reports highlighting equipment deficiencies received priority attention rather than bureaucratic resistance. Criticism flowed upward without career penalties for messengers. The system encouraged identification of problems as the first step toward solutions. Wehrmacht culture increasingly discouraged negative reporting. Officers feared accusations of defeatism when documenting Allied improvements. Technical assessments that contradicted leadership expectations faced institutional resistance. Political officers monitored communications for undermining morale, a charge carrying severe consequences. The environment suppressed accurate reporting precisely when reality diverged most from expectations. By March 1945, some German commanders recognized the changed circumstance through direct observation. Major Karl Weber, commanding a battle group near Remagen, noted, "American tank crews now fight with different psychology. They no longer abandon vehicles after initial hits, but continue fighting unless completely immobilized. This represents fundamental change from previous behavioral patterns." His insight reflected ground-level recognition that never translated to strategic reassessment. The technical modification itself demonstrated elegant simplicity. Engineers surrounded ammunition storage compartments with water glycol mixture contained in sealed metal boxes. The liquid absorbed heat from penetrating projectiles, preventing propellant from reaching ignition temperature. Secondary protection came from relocating ammunition below the turret floor rather than along hull sides. These combined changes dramatically reduced fire probability without requiring revolutionary redesign. Implementation speed highlighted American industrial efficiency. The first wet stowage prototypes entered testing in January 1944. Production models began reaching England by April. Battlefield deployment started during Normandy operations in June. Full-scale implementation across the European theater occurred by September. The entire cycle from problem identification to theater-wide solution took less than 10 months, a timeframe German industrial systems could not match. Field documentation revealed the impact. In Normandy operations, 65 to 80% of penetrated Shermans suffered catastrophic fires. By the Rhineland campaign in early 1945, this figure had dropped below 15%. Crew survival rates showed even more dramatic improvement. In June 1944, only 15% of crews escaped burning tanks uninjured. By February 1945, 82% of crews survived penetrations with minimal or no injuries. German tactical adjustments came too late to matter. A March 1945 directive from Oberkommando des Heeres finally acknowledged Sherman tanks demonstrate significantly reduced vulnerability to ammunition fires. Anti-tank teams should maintain fire until target shows clear mobility kill rather than expecting immediate catastrophic effects. The guidance represented belated recognition of a transformation that had already altered the battlefield equation irreversibly. For American tank crews, the impact transformed combat experience. Staff Sergeant Robert Anderson of 2nd Armored Division survived 4 tank penetrations between October 1944 and April 1945. "Each time we took a hit, I expected to die in flames like we'd seen in North Africa and Italy," he later wrote. "Instead, we had time to evacuate methodically."
This approach worked adequately against static threats, but failed completely when facing adaptive enemies implementing continuous improvement processes. Their vehicles continue operating despite damage levels that previously ensured destruction. The psychological advantage has shifted completely, while our intelligence failed to identify causal factors until too late. The oversight illustrated broader failure in German assessment capabilities. Technical observation teams operated with declining resources against increasing challenges. Analysis centers lacked access to emerging information. Distribution systems failed to disseminate insights effectively. The organization designed for methodical evaluation of static threats proved completely inadequate against rapidly evolving ones. By contrast, American adaptation processes demonstrated remarkable effectiveness. The Armored Force Board maintained continuous assessment of combat performance. Standardized damage reports flowed from maintenance battalions to production facilities. Engineers rotated between factory floors and forward repair depots. The system leveraged both battlefield experience and industrial expertise, creating feedback loops that German compartmentalized organizations could not match. For tank crews who experienced both early and late war models, the difference proved literally life-saving. Staff Sergeant James Hopkins fought from Sicily through Austria in 7 different Shermans. In Italy, we called our tanks death traps because one hit meant almost certain fire, he recalled. By Austria in 1945, everything had changed. My last Sherman took 3 separate penetrations from a Panther near Linz. The rounds went straight through without igniting ammunition. All 5 of us survived with minor injuries. That simply wouldn't have happened 2 years earlier. The transformation challenges popular conceptions of Sherman inadequacy. While American tanks never matched Panthers or Tigers in armor protection or main gun performance, they achieved crucial survivability improvement that partially compensated for these disadvantages. More importantly, they demonstrated continuous evolution throughout service life rather than static design limitations. This adaptation capacity ultimately proved more valuable than any specific technical characteristic. Modern military historians increasingly recognize this dimension of equipment effectiveness. Technical specifications provide incomplete understanding without considering adaptation processes that modify capabilities over time. The Sherman began service with serious vulnerabilities but ended the war with significantly improved characteristics across multiple dimensions. This evolution, implemented without disrupting production flow, represented achievement that technical specifications alone failed to capture. Field evidence from 1945 operations provides clearest illustration. Recovery units documented hundreds of penetrated Shermans without catastrophic fires. Maintenance battalions returned vehicles to service that previously would have been total losses. Crew survival statistics improved dramatically even as penetration rates remained consistent. The cumulative effect created resilience that German intelligence never fully comprehended until defeat became inevitable. The broader lesson extends beyond historical interest. Modern military acquisition increasingly emphasizes continuous improvement over service life rather than static initial specifications. Contemporary systems incorporate feedback mechanisms directly into program structures. The approach recognizes fundamental truth demonstrated in 1944-45. Adaptation speed determines battlefield success more than any specific technical capability.
For individual Sherman crews, this philosophy translated directly to survival. Captain Lawrence Wilson, commanding a tank company in 6th Armored Division, described the difference. In Normandy, we approached every engagement believing penetration meant death by fire. By the Rhine crossing, we understood our chances had fundamentally improved. This knowledge transformed everything: how aggressively we maneuvered, how we positioned vehicles, how we coordinated with infantry. The technical improvement created tactical possibilities that simply didn't exist previously. The Sherman transformation illustrates victory through evolution rather than revolution. Between 1942 and 1945,
The basic M4 design underwent continuous modification while maintaining production volume. Each change addressed specific battlefield deficiencies without disrupting manufacturing flow. This incremental improvement philosophy created compounding advantages that German intelligence consistently underestimated or overlooked entirely. 75 years later, the legacy informs contemporary military thinking. Modern acquisition programs incorporate continuous improvement directly into baseline requirements. Engineering teams remain embedded with operational units throughout equipment life cycles. The approach recognizes fundamental truth demonstrated through Sherman experience. Adaptation capacity ultimately matters more than any static technical specification. The wet stowage story contains philosophical lesson beyond military application. Innovation succeeds not through dramatic breakthrough moments, but through persistent improvement sustained over time. American industry embraced this reality intuitively. Manufacturing systems optimized for continuous refinement rather than theoretical perfection. The approach valued practical solutions over elegant designs, creating overwhelming advantage through accumulated incremental gains rather than revolutionary leaps. When Lieutenant Walter Ulm of the 352nd Infantry Division looked through his rangefinder on June 6, 1944, the horizon filled with ships represented more than military defeat. The Armada demonstrated industrial democracy mobilized toward common purpose, citizens working voluntarily in factories, shipyards, and tank plants because they believed in the cause rather than because dictators demanded it. The wet stowage modification emerged from this same democratic spirit. Engineers solving practical problems to save citizen soldiers' lives, rather than pursuing theoretical excellence or wonder weapons. Today, Sherman tanks stand in museums worldwide. Some display battle damage from penetrating rounds. Others bear scars from impacts that once would have ignited catastrophic fires. These silent witnesses preserve memory of both technical vulnerability and adaptation that overcame it. They remind us that victory in modern conflict comes not through individual brilliance, but through systems that learn and improve continuously, valuing practical effectiveness over theoretical perfection. The tanks remember what German intelligence forgot, that democratic industry serves people rather than abstract ideals. American engineers pursued wet stowage not primarily to win battles, but to save tanker lives. The human focus created victory more lasting than any weapon system could achieve alone. The lesson endures across generations, reminding us that strength lies not in technical specifications alone, but in capacity to recognize problems, develop solutions, and implement improvements continuously across time.
From German bunker rangefinders to Sherman ammunition compartments, the evidence speaks clearly. Adaptation speed determines success more than initial capability. Systems that evolve continuously overcome those seeking static perfection. Democracy's strength lies not in military tradition, but in industrial capacity mobilized through conviction rather than coercion. These truths transcend historical interest, informing contemporary understanding of both military effectiveness and broader innovation philosophy. For those who fought in Shermans across Europe, the improvement represented more than statistical abstraction. It meant survival through situations that previously guaranteed death. It meant returning to families rather than resting beneath white crosses. It meant victory achieved, not through individual heroism, but through collective effort. Engineers, workers, and soldiers together addressing vulnerabilities through practical solutions rather than philosophical rhetoric. Their story reminds us that progress comes through persistent improvement rather than revolutionary dreams, a lesson worth remembering in both military and civilian contexts today. The white marble crosses stand in perfect rows above former battlefields. Each marks one life given in freedom's cause. Below them, the ground has healed. Grass covers shell holes.
Trees grow where tanks once burned. The violence has passed. Only memory remains. And within that memory lies recognition that technical adaptation saves lives, that innovation matters most when measured not in specifications, but in soldiers returning home to families who otherwise would have mourned their loss. The historical significance of wet stowage extends far beyond technical achievement. Colonel Richard Anderson, Chief Technical Historian for the United States Ordnance Department, observed in 1950, "The Sherman transformation represents not merely equipment improvement, but philosophical revolution in military acquisition. The program demonstrated how battlefield feedback, industrial responsiveness, and continuous adaptation create compounding advantage against enemies focused on theoretical perfection. These lessons shape modern procurement more than any specific weapons system characteristics." Post-war analysis revealed additional dimensions of the intelligence failure. Surviving German assessment documents show persistent underestimation of American adaptive capacity. Oberkommando des Heeres technical bulletins from January 1945 still described Sherman vulnerability in terms applicable to 1943 models. Distribution delays meant frontline commanders received outdated information months after it ceased reflecting battlefield reality. The compartmentalized structure prevented holistic analysis that might have identified emerging patterns earlier. The contrast with American assessment systems proved stark. Technical observation teams embedded directly with combat formations documented performance in standardized formats. Reports flowed simultaneously to both production facilities and training centers. Engineers regularly rotated between factory floors and forward maintenance depots. The arrangement created feedback loops measuring days or weeks rather than months or years. This compression represented decisive advantage in adaptation race that ultimately determined outcome. Veterans of both systems recognized the difference clearly. Dr. Heinrich Müller, who served with Waffenprüfamt 6, Weapons Testing Office during the war, later reflected, "Our technical intelligence excelled at documenting known specifications, but struggled with identifying evolutionary trends. We meticulously cataloged individual vehicle characteristics while missing fundamental transformation in vulnerability patterns." The approach proved completely inadequate against enemy implementing continuous improvement across thousands of vehicles monthly. General Bruce Clark, who commanded Combat Command B of 7th Armored Division, provided American perspective. "Our greatest strength lay not in individual tank characteristics, but in industrial capacity for sustained improvement. When crews reported problems, engineers developed solutions, factories implemented changes, and improved vehicles reached battlefields within months. The cycle operated with efficiency German systems could never match, creating cumulative advantage that eventually proved decisive. This advantage manifested most clearly in maintenance economics. Records from 3rd Army Ordnance Department show dramatic transformation in vehicle recovery statistics. During Normandy operations in June-July 1944, maintenance battalions salvaged approximately 25% of Shermans penetrated by enemy fire. By March-April 1945, this figure exceeded 65% theater-wide, with some divisions reporting recovery rates above 70%. The shift created massive sustainment advantage the German intelligence never fully comprehended. Standardization magnified the effect. American logistics centered around interchangeable components across Sherman variants. Maintenance units stockpiled engines, transmissions, suspension components, and armament modules that fit multiple models. This commonality allowed rapid battlefield repair using standardized parts, creating resilience that specialized German designs could not match, despite technical superiority in specific categories. The evolution continues influencing modern military acquisition. Contemporary programs incorporate spiral development philosophies directly inspired by Sherman experience. Systems enter service with acknowledged limitations, receiving continuous improvement throughout operational life rather than achieving theoretical perfection before deployment. The approach values practical effectiveness over elegant design, creating adaptability that proves decisive in dynamic environments. For individual tank crews, the improvement transformed combat psychology. Lieutenant Frank Baker commanded Sherman platoons in both Italy and Germany, experiencing firsthand the vulnerability reduction. In Italy, we operated knowing penetration meant probable death by fire. Crews bailed out immediately when hit, sometimes unnecessarily, because staying inside burning tanks guaranteed horrible death. By Germany in 1945, everything had changed. We understood our survival chances had dramatically improved. This knowledge transformed our fighting spirit. Crews maintained combat operations despite damage that previously ensured destruction. Statistical evidence confirms this transformation. Medical records from 3rd Armored Division document crew casualty rates declining from 74% to 21% for penetrated tanks between June 1944 and March 1945, despite consistent penetration probability. These figures represent not just improved equipment, but preserved combat experience that further multiplied effectiveness. Veteran crews maximized technical capabilities through practical knowledge that new replacements could not duplicate. The contrast with German experience proved stark. Panzer formations suffered accelerating experience loss throughout 1944-45. Crew casualties required continual replacement with inadequately trained personnel. The erosion created formations with declining effectiveness despite maintaining equipment strength on paper. The dynamic exemplifies broader pattern. Adaptation speed ultimately matters more than any specific technical capability. Today, the Sherman legacy informs acquisition philosophy across NATO forces. Programs emphasize evolutionary development rather than revolutionary breakthroughs. Requirements documents specify continuous improvement provisions alongside baseline capabilities. Testing occurs throughout operational deployment rather than exclusively before service entry. The approach recognizes fundamental truth demonstrated in 1944-45. Systems that adapt effectively overcome those seeking static perfection, regardless of initial technical characteristics. Major General Robert Grobe, who commanded 6th Armored Division during final German operations, captured this principle in post-war assessment. Our advantage emerged not from individual tank superiority, but from industrial capacity for sustained improvement. When we identified vulnerabilities, engineers developed solutions, factories implemented changes, and improved vehicles reached us within weeks or months. The cumulative effect created overwhelming advantage that German forces could not match, despite specific technical excellence. This perspective challenges popular conceptions, emphasizing Sherman inadequacy against German heavy tanks. While American vehicles never matched Panthers or Tigers in armor protection or main gun performance, they achieved critical survivability improvement that partially compensated for these disadvantages. More importantly, they demonstrated continuous evolution throughout service life rather than static design limitations. This adaptation capacity ultimately proved more valuable than any specific technical characteristic. Field evidence provides clearest illustration. Technical assessment teams documented hundreds of penetrated Shermans without catastrophic fires during 1945 operations. Maintenance battalions returned vehicles to service that previously would have been total losses. Crew survival statistics improved dramatically even as penetration rates remained consistent. The cumulative effect created resilience that German intelligence never fully comprehended until defeat became inevitable. The broader lesson transcends historical interest. Modern military organizations increasingly recognize that adaptation speed determines battlefield success more than any specific capability. Contemporary systems incorporate feedback mechanisms directly into acquisition structures. Engineering teams remain embedded with operational units throughout equipment life cycles. The approach acknowledges fundamental truth demonstrated through Sherman experience. Systems that improve continuously overcome those seeking static perfection, regardless of initial specifications. For individual tankers, this philosophy translated directly to survival. Captain Richard Martin commanded Sherman companies in both 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions, experiencing both early and late war models. The transformation was miraculous from crew perspective. In Normandy, we operated knowing penetration meant probable death by fire. By the Rhine crossing, we understood our chances had fundamentally improved. This knowledge changed everything about our combat psychology, how aggressively we maneuvered, how we positioned vehicles, how long we remained in endangered positions. The technical improvement created tactical possibilities that simply didn't exist previously. The wet stowage story contains philosophical lesson beyond military application. Innovation succeeds not through dramatic breakthrough moments, but through persistent improvement sustained over time.
American industry embraced this reality intuitively. Manufacturing systems optimized for continuous refinement rather than theoretical perfection. The approach valued practical solutions over elegant designs, creating overwhelming advantage through accumulated incremental gains rather than revolutionary leaps. Post-war analysis by Operations Research Office documented precise vulnerability reduction. Among Shermans manufactured before April 1944, 70–80% experienced catastrophic fires following penetration. This figure dropped to 30–40% for transitional production between April and August 1944. Vehicles manufactured after September 1944 demonstrated just 10–15% fire probability when penetrated by equivalent projectiles. These statistics represent one of the most significant vulnerability reductions achieved during the entire war. For maintenance units, the improvement transformed operational economics. Major Thomas Anderson commanded an ordnance maintenance battalion supporting 4th Armored Division. Before wet stowage implementation, penetrated Shermans typically burned completely, requiring total replacement. By early 1945, we recovered majority of damaged vehicles for repair rather than replacement. The shift created massive sustainment advantage that multiplied our effective combat power beyond simple numerical superiority. German failure to recognize this transformation stemmed partly from institutional factors. Technical intelligence operated through compartmentalized structure that prevented holistic analysis. Ammunition specialists, armor protection experts, and operational analysts worked separately without effective coordination. The system excelled at documenting individual specifications but failed completely at identifying evolutionary patterns that collectively transformed battlefield equation. By contrast, American adaptation processes demonstrated remarkable integration. The Armored Force Board maintained continuous assessment involving both technical specialists and operational commanders. Standardized reporting formats ensured consistent data collection across formations. Regular conferences brought together engineers, production managers, and field commanders to align priorities. The system leveraged both scientific expertise and practical experience, creating effectiveness that German compartmentalized organizations could not match. The legacy extends into modern force development. Contemporary military organizations increasingly emphasize adaptation speed as primary determinant of battlefield success. Acquisition programs incorporate continuous improvement directly into baseline requirements. Engineering teams remain embedded with operational units throughout equipment life cycles. The approach recognizes fundamental truth demonstrated through Sherman experience. Systems that evolve continuously overcome those seeking static perfection regardless of initial specifications. For historians, the wet stowage story challenges simplistic narratives about equipment effectiveness. Technical specifications provide incomplete understanding without considering adaptation processes that modify capabilities over time. The Sherman began service with serious vulnerabilities, but ended the war with significantly improved characteristics across multiple dimensions. This evolution, implemented without disrupting production flow, represents achievement that static comparisons fail to capture adequately. Criticism flowed upward without career penalties for messengers. The environment encouraged problem identification as essential first step toward solution rather than threat to institutional reputation. Wehrmacht culture increasingly demonstrated opposite tendency. Officers feared accusations of defeatism when documenting Allied improvements.
Technical assessments that contradicted leadership expectations faced institutional resistance. Political officers monitored communications for undermining morale, a charge carrying severe consequences. The environment suppressed accurate reporting precisely when reality diverged most from expectations. Field evidence from 1945 operations reveals the consequence. Recovery units documented hundreds of penetrated Shermans without catastrophic fires. Maintenance battalions returned vehicles to service that previously would have been total losses. Crew survival statistics improved dramatically, even as penetration rates remained consistent. These patterns remained largely invisible to German intelligence until defeat became inevitable. The broader lesson extends beyond historical interest. Modern military organizations increasingly recognize that adaptation speed determines battlefield success more than any specific capability. Contemporary systems incorporate feedback mechanisms directly into program structures. Engineering teams remain embedded with operational units throughout equipment life cycles. The approach acknowledges fundamental truth demonstrated through Sherman experience. Systems that improve continuously overcome those seeking static perfection, regardless of initial characteristics. For individual Sherman crews, this philosophy translated directly to survival. Staff Sergeant Paul Davidson served with tank battalions from North Africa through Germany. The improvement between early and late war Shermans was night and day. In Tunisia, we called our tanks Ronsons, or death traps, because penetration meant almost certain fire. By 1945 in Germany, everything had changed. My last Sherman took 3 separate hits near Kassel without burning. The entire crew survived with minor injuries. That simply wouldn't have happened 2 years earlier. Technical assessment teams verified this transformation through systematic examination. Ordnance Department reports documented fundamental changes in damage patterns. Early war penetrations typically produced catastrophic fires that consumed vehicles completely. By 1945, penetration more commonly resulted in mechanical damage without secondary explosions. The shift created entirely different sustainment economics, allowing recovery and repair rather than complete replacement. For commanders, this improvement transformed force preservation calculations. Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding 37th Tank Battalion of 4th Armored Division, noted in February 1945, "Our ability to sustain offensive operations despite significant losses directly reflects improved crew survival rates. When personnel return from engagements that previously proved fatal, experience accumulates rather than depletes. The cumulative effect has fundamentally altered sustainability equations in our favor, creating exploitation opportunities across the entire front." German officers recognized the same reality from opposite perspective. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, who commanded Panzer Division, observed in March 1945, "American formations demonstrate resilience that contradicts our experience from earlier campaigns. Their crews fight with confidence born from improved survival chances. Their vehicles continue operating despite damage levels that previously ensured destruction. The psychological advantage has shifted completely while our intelligence failed to identify causal factors until too late." The oversight illustrated broader failure in German assessment capabilities. Technical observation teams operated with declining resources against increasing challenges. Analysis centers lacked access to emerging information. Distribution systems failed to disseminate insights effectively. The organization, designed for methodical evaluation of static threats, proved completely inadequate against rapidly evolving ones. By contrast, American adaptation processes demonstrated remarkable effectiveness. The Armored Force Board maintained continuous assessment of combat performance. Standardized damage reports flowed from maintenance battalions to production facilities. Engineers rotated between factory floors and forward repair depots. The system leveraged both battlefield experience and industrial expertise, creating feedback loops that German compartmentalized organizations could not match.
For tank crews who experienced both early and late war models, the difference proved literally life-saving. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, whose leadership with 37th Tank Battalion earned legendary status, commented after the war, "The difference between early and late war Shermans transcended technical specifications. The vulnerability reduction created entirely different psychological reality for crews. When men believe they'll likely survive penetration rather than burn alive, they fight differently, more aggressively, more persistently, more effectively." The technical improvement multiplied combat power beyond simple numerical advantage. Modern military historians increasingly recognize this dimension of equipment effectiveness. Technical specifications provide incomplete understanding without considering adaptation processes that modify capabilities over time. The Sherman began service with serious vulnerabilities but ended the war with significantly improved characteristics across multiple dimensions. This evolution, implemented without disrupting production flow, represented achievement that technical specifications alone failed to capture. Field evidence from 1945 operations provides clearest illustration. Recovery units documented hundreds of penetrated Shermans without catastrophic fires. Maintenance battalions returned vehicles to service that previously would have been total losses. Crew survival statistics improved dramatically even as penetration rates remained consistent. The cumulative effect created resilience the German intelligence never fully comprehended until defeat became inevitable. The broader lesson extends beyond historical interest. Modern military acquisition increasingly emphasizes continuous improvement over service life rather than static initial specifications. Contemporary systems incorporate feedback mechanisms directly into program structures. The approach recognizes fundamental truth demonstrated in 1944-45. Adaptation speed determines battlefield success more than any specific technical capability. For individual Sherman crews, this philosophy translated directly to survival. Staff Sergeant Thomas Ellison served with 2nd Armored Division throughout the European campaign. In Normandy, we approached every engagement believing penetration meant death by fire. By the Rhine crossing, we understood our chances had fundamentally improved. This knowledge transformed everything: how aggressively we maneuvered, how we positioned vehicles, how we coordinated with infantry. The technical improvement created tactical possibilities that simply didn't exist previously. 75 years later, the legacy informs contemporary military thinking. Modern acquisition programs incorporate continuous improvement directly into baseline requirements.
Engineering teams remain embedded with operational units throughout equipment life cycles. The approach recognizes fundamental truth demonstrated through Sherman experience. Adaptation capacity ultimately matters more than any static technical specification. The wet stowage story contains a philosophical lesson beyond military application. Innovation succeeds not through dramatic breakthrough moments, but through persistent improvement sustained over time. American industry embraced this reality intuitively. Manufacturing systems optimized for continuous refinement rather than theoretical perfection. The approach valued practical solutions over elegant designs, creating overwhelming advantage through accumulated incremental gains rather than revolutionary leaps. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.